Residents of New Orleans are marking a grim anniversary today. It was 15 years ago that Hurricane Katrina slammed into the city and became one of the most devastating storms in U.S. history. Failed levees, poor preparation, a slow governmental response resulted in a huge disaster. At least 1,800 people were killed and 400,000 were forced to leave their homes permanently in some cases. It's a reality that has profoundly changed the social fabric of Louisiana, even as the area continues to rebuild. Well, to talk about this, we're now reaching out to Jarvis DeBerry. He was a journalist in New Orleans when Katrina hit. He worked for the Times-Picayune, which was later awarded the Pulitzer Prize for coverage of the storm. He's now the editor of the Louisiana Illuminator. He joins us from New Orleans today. So, Jarvis, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You know, as we talk about this anniversary, the timing is so interesting because here it comes just days after Hurricane Laura hit Louisiana. Luckily, it was not as devastating as some had feared. But I do wonder, in a state so scarred by Katrina, what happens to people in the community when another huge storm approaches? What does it do to people on the ground, in their hearts and their minds?
It causes all sorts of anxiety, as you can imagine. You know, we will be remembering this day no matter what happened, what was happening with the weather. But it seems that quite often, just as we are preparing our hearts and minds to deal with our memories of Katrina, then there's yet another storm in the Gulf that's at least threatening New Orleans and Louisiana. As you said, we are thankful that Laura wasn't as devastating as predicted, but it really puts people in a really depressed and anxious mood whenever there's a storm in the Gulf, but especially around this time of year.
As a journalist, and you know, if you don't mind, I'm going to speak for the both of us. When we're in the midst of a story, oftentimes we just barrel through the story, doing what we have to do on a professional level, and only after the fact do we realize the impact of covering a story has on us. So I wonder for you, on a personal level, what sort of effect did Katrina have on you?
Wow, that's a tough question. I'm still learning those things, even 15 years later. I think there is a sense, a really sad sense, that everything can be snatched away in a moment's time, that the things that we hold dear, whether they're photos of families or heirlooms that our families have passed down to us, can all be gone in an instant. And that's a really hard lesson for anyone to deal with. The televisions and the furniture and the cars and even the houses themselves can be replaced, but some things cannot. And the lesson I think that so many of us learned in 2005 was that when those things that are nearest and dearest to us disappear, there is no replacement for them.
I also wonder about your take on New Orleans, the city itself, because, you know, in the I don't have to tell you, but in the days, the weeks, the months, the years after Katrina, there was always this constant promise that New Orleans was going to be rebuilt, and it was going to be rebuilt for the better. Has it, in your opinion?
It really depends on your perspective. I think most New Orleanians themselves would say no, it has not been built for the better. There are places that have been rebuilt, but those places don't necessarily serve the people who were already here before Katrina. There has been a grand displacement of people. Gentrification is rampant in the city, where neighborhoods that were mostly Black before Katrina are a lot less so. 15 years later, there are people who grew up in the city's most culturally significant neighborhoods, whether it's Treme or the 7th Ward or other communities in New Orleans that were closely linked with the city's culture. They can't afford to live there anymore. And so, a visitor may say, hey, this looks rebuilt, but it's not rebuilt for the benefit of the people who call New Orleans home.
Yeah, and I think that really points to something that people are talking about after Katrina hit, this exposure of the racism and the racial inequity that runs not through the United States, but also through New Orleans. So certainly an interesting discussion. Jarvis, I want to thank you for this as we mark the 15th anniversary of Katrina. So appreciate the time.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And that's Jarvis DeBerry, who is the editor of the Louisiana Illuminator.